Welcome to Rough Roads and Solid Rock, a Bible study podcast where we dig into Scripture together, exploring the real, messy journey of following Jesus one step at a time on a foundation that never moves. This season, we're walking alongside Simon Peter, tracing the highs and lows of his journey with Jesus through the Gospels and Acts. Through Peter's story, we'll find practical lessons and real hope for our own lives. So are you ready? Let's dig in. Have you ever had a near-death experience? A moment where you thought for sure this is it? This is the end? You know, we joke about how in those moments your life flashes before your eyes, but there's something true. If you've experienced something like that, you get a strange mental clarity in that moment. I've had an experience like that. When I was in Bible college, I would help with a couple of my buddies with a youth group that was a little bit of a drive away every Sunday. One Sunday night, we were heading back to the dorms, and it was winter. It was just starting to snow, but the roads were still dry. None of it had stuck yet. And my buddy was driving, and I was sitting in the passenger seat, driving in his minivan. We were coming down on the on-ramp to get onto the interstate highway. And as we were coming down on the ramp, my buddy started saying, "Oh gosh, here we go, here we go." I didn't know what he was talking about, but I quickly learned. Because as we were coming down, getting ready to merge into the lane, there was a semi driving in the right lane right next to us, and it was spraying this fresh snow. And sure enough, we were losing traction. And the van started to veer off into the ditch. My buddy turned the wheel real sharp, and we started spinning across the highway. Now, in that moment, I thought for sure we were going to die. And all that came to mind was, "Jesus, save us! Jesus, save us!" I was just yelling it out over and over, "Jesus, save us! Jesus, save us!" And as we were spinning across the highway, we rotated 3 times. And the first time when we were facing back towards the oncoming traffic, there were one set of headlights coming right for us. We spun a second time. And we were facing backwards, and there were those headlights, only this time they were a little bit closer. Now, I thought at this point, it's over. We're done. We're going to get hit head on. We spun one more time. The third time we're facing backwards. No headlights. They were gone. We finished that final rotation. We ended up in the grass on the other side of 3 lanes of highway, and we were facing forward, and there in front of us was a semi-truck. The driver had seen us spinning and swerved off the road just in time to avoid hitting us. You know, Simon Peter had his own near-death experience, a moment where he thought for sure, this is it, this is the end. Today we're going to look at that story in Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. Feel free to follow along in your own Bible, but I will be reading today out of the English Standard Version. For a little bit of context, this account takes place right after Jesus has just fed the 5,000 people. You're probably familiar with this story. Jesus was teaching in the countryside. The people get hungry. They don't have any food. So Jesus takes a little boy's lunch, a few loaves of bread, and a few fish, and he's able to multiply it enough to feed this entire crowd of 5,000 people. And the people are amazed. The disciples are there to see it all. They can't believe what Jesus has just done. And so that leads us to where we're at today, picking up in verse 22. Says, "Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds." Now pause there. You may be asking, the other side of what? Where are they? Well, they're at the Sea of Galilee, the place where Jesus did a lot of his ministry with his disciples. So he tells the disciples, get in the boat. He sends them to the other side. They got to do ministry in another town on the other side. The quickest way to get there is to get in a boat and travel across the lake rather than going around it. So that's what they do. And he's going to stick around to take care of the crowds. Picking up in verse 23, it says, "And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat, by this time, was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them." So the disciples are in the boat, and they're probably a couple miles out into the middle of the Sea of Galilee at this point. A storm comes up. Right? The waves are crashing against the boat. The winds are beating against them pretty hard. Now, if I were in that boat, if I were one of the disciples, while I'm whatever they were trying to do, maybe straining at the oars or trying to mess with the sails, whatever, you know what I would probably be doing in that moment? I'd be grumbling. And you know what I'd be grumbling about? I didn't want to get in this boat. I'm only here because Jesus told me to get in this boat. Surely Jesus could have seen that there was a storm coming, right? Why would he have done this? Why did he put us in this situation? Well, picking up again in verse 25, it says, And in the fourth watch of the night, so that's right before dawn, he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, It is a ghost! And they cried out in fear. Totally understandable that the disciples would assume that this is not a regular human being walking on the water. People don't do that, right? And so they jump to the conclusion, it's a ghost, and they're terrified. Verse 27, but immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. This is so Jesus, right? He's always trying to reassure everyone's fear. Over and over again, he's saying, do not be afraid. And he identifies himself. He says, it is I. Now, this is probably working on two levels. First, he's saying, it's me, Jesus. You know me. You recognize me. Okay, he's identifying himself in that way. But a better translation of this verse might actually be, it is I am. Now, that might just sound like funky grammar to you, or you may recognize the name I am. This is the name that God self-identified when he was speaking to Moses at the burning bush. I am. It's the name that God's people, the Israelites, for all of their history up to this point, have known God by. I am. So in this moment, Jesus is making one of the clearest claims of his divinity. He's saying, not just I'm Jesus, your friend who you know, your teacher, your rabbi. He's saying, I am God. So do not be afraid. It is a powerful, potent statement. And we don't know how all of the disciples reacted to it in that moment, but we do get one reaction. Of course, our buddy Simon Peter, we get a glimpse into how he responds, picking up in verse 28. And Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, probably working on two levels again, if it's Jesus, right, and if it is truly you are God as you claim to be, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. He said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. At this point, you can only applaud Peter's faith. Unbelievable, right? He sees Jesus out there and he steps over the side of the boat, right? He surrenders the weight of his entire body onto his foot that is just tickling the top of the waves, right? He lets go of the side of the boat and he lands standing on the surface of the water. Now, I can only imagine what this was like. If it's still windy and wavy, is he like riding up and down like a surfboard, right? Or are the waters right below his feet calm? He's just able to stand there and walk straight on? We don't know. We can only imagine what it was like. But Peter demonstrates this incredible faith in this moment by getting out and walking on the water towards Jesus. And notice, he didn't do this impulsively. He asked Jesus, if you want me to, command me, and I will come to you. So Peter is doing this not just out of an unbelievably crazy faith that's not rooted in anything. He's doing it because Jesus has told him to. Jesus said, come. So Peter is obeying. He responds to the call of Jesus to come out onto the water. But I love Peter because he's so relatable. He's such a normal guy, right? And his faith, even though it's crazy strong in this moment, in the next moment, things change. Verse 30, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Right? This is the moment. He thinks, it's over. He's done. He's going to drown. His faith is going to be rewarded by a tragic death. But in that moment, he also has this clarity. His doubts are coming over him as he's looking at the storms around him. But in the midst of the storm, he has the clarity to cry out, Jesus, save me. Lord, save me. His faith is still there. In verse 31, Jesus immediately reached out his hand, took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt? You of little faith, why did you doubt?" I don't know if that's exactly what I would want to hear in that moment from Jesus. It looks like Peter's just demonstrated this unbelievable faith. And Jesus then seems to be criticizing him? That doesn't seem fair. Well, we'll see in a moment that Jesus isn't just trying to pick at Peter's lack of faith, but he is communicating something. He is teaching something profound for his disciples. In verse 32 it says, "And when they," meaning Peter and Jesus, "got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'Truly, you are the Son of God.'" So what's going on here in this passage? In verse 31, why does Jesus criticize Peter for having doubt, for having little faith? Well, here's what's going on in this passage. Jesus is challenging Simon Peter to another level of faith. So let's think about it. Peter demonstrates huge faith when he steps out onto the water and he's walking on the water towards Jesus. That's a big deal. That's definitely faith. But let's think about what's going on there. Peter is doing this, yes, in obedience to Jesus, but Jesus has called him. Why? Because Peter demanded proof. He demanded a sign that it really is Jesus, right? And if we are people who demand proof in order to believe, there's never going to be enough proof for us to eliminate doubt. That's what we see in Peter's example here. He's got the proof of Jesus' divinity and Jesus standing right there on the water. Right? He's got another level of proof. It's not only is Jesus standing there on the water, but Jesus is calling Peter to come out and walk on the water, and he's able to do it successfully. But in the moment when Peter takes his eyes off of Jesus and he sees the wind around him, what creeps in? Doubt, fear. He instantly forgets the unbelievable proof he's just seen, proof that you and I will probably never see in our own lives. You know, have you ever thought about if you were with Jesus, your faith would be so much stronger? Sometimes we think that, right? But here we have a guy, Peter, who, again, literally, he's seeing miracles happen. And in a moment, he is overwhelmed by the wind. He's overcome by fear, and he has doubt. And he cries out, "Jesus, save me," because he thinks he is going to die. Right? Michael Card writes a book called The Fragile Stone, and it's about stories of Peter in the Gospels. And he says this: "There's no proof great enough to prevent doubt. If you base your belief on proof, sooner or later, you too will sink." And that's absolutely true. If you need your life to be smooth and perfect, and you need God to be doing amazing, miraculous things in order for you to believe in him, your faith is going to be pretty weak, because that's not life. Jesus doesn't lead us only through smooth waters. Sometimes he calls us, just as he calls his disciples, out into the middle of a storm. Your following Jesus may lead you into situations that you do not want to be in. Situations that make you feel afraid. Situations that may make you think that Jesus is crazy, right? It may make you doubt Jesus' goodness and love in your life. But Jesus, he doesn't want us to have surface level faith. In fact, sometimes we need to go through the hard storms. Sometimes we need to sink a little bit in order to discover a deeper level of faith. Michael Card continues in this book. He says, "Why did Peter doubt? After all, he had begun to accomplish it. He had walked on the water. But there was a deeper lesson he had to learn, and Jesus is intent on him not missing it. even as now, you and I must learn it if we are to move forward as we walk through the windstorm of following Jesus. It is almost never heard in American churches. Indeed, there are some congregations who would call it heresy, but the lesson is that Peter needed to sink in order to take the next step of faith in Jesus. Because walking on the water does not ultimately increase our faith, only sinking does. Those who ask for miracles and receive them soon forget. Those who suffer for Christ's sake never forget. They have their own wounds to remind them. So where's your faith at? Is your faith strong only when you're walking on top of the smooth waters? Do you have a surface level faith? Or have you gone through some storms with Jesus? Have you had some moments where you were in over your head, where you were overwhelmed, where you were scared, where you were frustrated? Where was your faith at in those moments? Were you crying out to Jesus, Lord, save me, take me out of this storm? Was that your expectation of Jesus' leadership in your life? Or, in the middle of your storm, did you have a quiet faith that says, no matter what's going on, Jesus has me? No matter how rocky things are, no matter how choppy the waters are, no matter how hard the wind is beating against me right now, I know Jesus is right in front of me, and I can walk through it. That's the challenge of being a follower of Jesus. It's not always easy. It's not always smooth sailing. But if Jesus is the one leading us, then we don't need to be afraid. We can have a strong faith in him that he knows what he's doing, and that our faith will grow if we persevere through the hardships, through the difficult things. When we get on the other side of the storms, we do know that Jesus is who he claims to be. Right? He is the divine. So where's your faith at? Have you allowed yourself to sink with Jesus? Once again, I'm excited to be able to talk to you a little bit about Show Me Youth Home in Lamont, Missouri. Compelled by Jesus Christ to rescue and restore young lives, Show Me has provided safe, stable, loving Christian homes to at-risk youth since 1967. Through individualized family care, licensed counseling, and Christ-centered education, Show Me helps children overcome past challenges and prepare for a purposeful future. Here's what they do. They operate group family homes led by trained house parents, and that is so key, with 6 to 8 children per home, offering structure, responsibility, and belonging. They offer counseling by licensed professionals to support emotional, spiritual, and psychological healing, and they provide programs like Leadership U, which is an equine and canine mentorship program. They provide Path to Purpose, which is a career planning program, and a private Christian K-12 school for academic enrichment. They recently launched a family care ministry to support single mothers with their children through coaching, resources, and housing. They are doing some amazing work, and they've been able to expand their facilities to be able to bring in even more kids. They're expecting dozens more kids to be entered into their program this fall. And so I would love to ask you to be able to financially support this ministry, even if it's just a one-time gift this month. I ask you to prayerfully consider supporting the work they do. I can vouch that what they're doing is amazing gospel-centered work. If you would like to find out more about them for yourself, you can visit their website at showmehelpingkids.com. Thanks for listening to Rough Roads and Solid Rock from Stepwise Ministry, helping you follow Jesus one step at a time. Like, subscribe, and visit stepwiseministry.org for more.